My name is Muhammad Lila. I'm a war zone correspondent. Spent most of my life reporting from the world's most dangerous places. And now I do the exact opposite. I'm the founder and CEO of Goodable, and we're building a platform that shares positivity to any screen and any device in the world. So the story of Goodable started when I was held at gunpoint. It happened in Ukraine when the violence was just kicking off. And one of the things I'm very good at, thankfully, is staying alive. And I stayed alive. And no one on any of my teams has ever been hurt. I've averaged more than 100 flights a year. I've been on Black Hawk helicopters, survived gunfights, ambushes, people trying to shoot down our helicopter, flown onto aircraft carriers, been privileged to do a lot of really interesting and sometimes dangerous stuff. Ukraine was a turning point for me because I was able to see the country sort of being taken over with my own eyes. And we were held at gunpoint. Now, usually when you're held at gunpoint, it's actually, it sounds weird, but it's a good thing. There's a reason they're not killing you. They're holding you. And so you can sort of breathe a sigh of relief that like, hey, they haven't killed us and they don't want to kill us. In Ukraine, it was a little bit more dangerous because it was very fluid on the ground and people around us were getting shot. And I remember I made sure my team was okay once we extracted from the situation. When I was on the flight home, I just became obsessed with this problem of why everything we see on the news is so negative all the time. And this is something that impacts each and every one of us. When you consume news, whether you're on your social media feeds or watching old school television or listening to a podcast, 95% of that content is actually really bad for your mental health. And I started looking deeper and I realized the issue wasn't content. The issue was algorithms. Algorithms control everything that we see. Whether you're looking at a screen in the backseat of a cab, a screen in an airport, a screen on your phone, even your email is controlled by algorithms. So when you, for example, get an email at the top of your inbox, there's an algorithm that's saying, hey, you haven't replied in a few days. I think you should reply to this one first. And the same principle applies when you're watching YouTube, for example. You think you click on a video because you chose that video. But the fact that that video is on your screen in the first place is because an algorithm decided to feed it to you. And I sat back and I said, well, if algorithms are making everyone miserable, which they are, and they're causing depression on a global scale, why not just fix the algorithms? Like everyone is building solutions for depression and anxiety and PTSD and all of these things are great. But it's like if you're connected to an IV drip and what's in that IV bag is slowly poisoning you, the correct solution isn't to connect another IV drip with the cure and then fight it out inside your body, which is what a lot of solutions try to do today. The correct solution is to replace that toxicity in the first IV bag with something that's healthy for you. And if you could just manage to do that, you're going to cure depression and you're just going to have an amazing life. And so that's how Goodable started. We started as a news platform that only covers good news. We grew really fast. We grew from 400,000 impressions a month to 4 million to 40 million to 100 million within just a few years. But what we realized in the process of doing this was we had built algorithms that powered our own platform. And we did it for us. We did it as a tool to make it easier for us. And what ended up happening was companies started reaching out to us and saying, hey, nice platform, but can we just pay for your AI? And so we started as a media company, and now we've turned into what we like to call a company that's building the world's happiness algorithm. And the goal is that anytime you look at a screen, it should make you measurably happier. So it's a fundamental shift in the way people think of screens. The same way that when Uber transformed the way that you think of a car. Nobody thought you'd get into a car with a stranger before. Or Airbnb. Nobody thought you'd rent your home for like an afternoon or a day to like a complete stranger. We're doing what Uber and Airbnb did for cars and homes. We're doing that with screens. Most people think of screens as a way to convey information, like, show a video or show like the weather or an ad. We think of screens as a way to actually program your behavior. And we sat back and we said, well, if you can look at a screen for 30 seconds and we can make you happy and we can do this consistently, how will this change your life? How would this change your ability to purchase products? How would this change your calmness before you get on a flight? How would this change, your experience at a shopping mall? People don't like shopping anymore. It's like, it's frustrating and prices are so high and it's crowded and like shopping malls are really struggling. And so we said, well, what if you could just make people happy when they look at a screen? Would that improve their experience? And so that's the whole life cycle of sort of where Goodable started and where we are today. The way it's evolved was that our technology actually was slightly ahead of its time. We were building tools before ChatGPT was even a thing, or before it became sort of known worldwide. And the current state of our technology is actually that we can scan anything online, including videos, and our AI will tell you, sort of like as a predictive tool, how positive that content is before you ever see it. And so we've started selling this AI to like news organizations, but the application of this technology can actually change the world. Because if we can analyze something and tell you, hey, this is going to be positive, it's going to be good for your mental health, it's going to make you smile. Imagine what platforms that sell content for a living can do with that technology, right? So now if you go on, like, I don't know, Reddit, right? I'm on Reddit like all the time because I'm just addicted to it. But like if you go on Reddit, it's just a steady stream of like just crazy shit. It's just crazy stuff. People talking about all sorts of things. What if we could plug in our algorithms to Reddit? And now as a Redditor, you have a choice where you could say, look, I don't want to see all this toxic stuff. I want to click a button. I want it to say powered by Goodable. And now it's just showing me the best things around the world. So if I'm interested in cars, it's going to show me the best things in cars, in tech, in finance, in sports. I don't want to see the story of like the athlete who, ruptured his Achilles. I'd rather see the story of like the athlete who just bought 50 turkeys for Thanksgiving for his neighborhood, right? So we think the technology is transformative, and it's not a pivot. It's just an evolution of how our company has grown. It's interesting because when Yahoo came to us, we were surprised because they're such a big organization. And it turns out that they really liked our technology. And the differentiator wasn't our content. Like if you go on our app, for example, you'll see positive news. It wasn't the positive news that they were interested in specifically. It was the technology that was allowing them to discover it. So Yahoo publishes something like 20,000 news articles a day. That I think they're the biggest, or if not one of the biggest news publishers in the world. And now Yahoo has a challenge because Yahoo wants to create the most wholesome browsing experience in the world. That's their goal. And it's driven by business outcomes. When people are happy, they're going to keep coming back to you. It's like if you own a store, right? This is something that like I learned from my father being a small business owner for years. He would talk to his customers. He would get to know them. They would come in. If they didn't come in once a week, he'd ask where they were. And the idea is that when you make people happy, you make them feel comfortable, they're going to keep giving you their business. So Yahoo's very forward thinking, and they realized actually that when news is so negative all the time, it creates a bad response where people are just like, I don't want this anymore. Like I can't handle all this negativity all the time. And so their goal is to create the world's healthiest and happiest browsing experience, and we're part of that. The biggest issue right now with all of these engagement platforms is that they're designed on purpose to engage and enrage. That was their business model for years. And for a lot of these platforms, it still is, right? Get people outraged and they're going to share it with their friends. Get people angry and they're going to keep coming back for more. And it works to an extent, but what ends up happening is that everybody just becomes angry. So 40% of the entire world right now has stopped consuming news. Just think about that for a second. 40%, 2 out of every 5 people openly say they no longer consume content on news feeds. And when you ask them why, the number one reason is that it puts them in a bad mood. So there's 2 ways of looking at this. Number one is that this is huge, that we've never had this in history where 40% of people just don't want to know what's happening in the world. It's probably not a good thing. But it's interesting because they have that level of self-awareness to say, you know what? I don't need to expose myself to kids being blown up and being starved and planes crashing. There was a plane, I don't know if this is going to date the video, but there was a plane that crashed today. It was a very large aircraft that crashed in India. On my train ride here, I must have seen that footage like 8 times. An entire plane literally going up in flames. Imagine seeing a plane crash 8 times and then walking into the office. You think you're going to have a good day? Right? If you have an ounce of humanity, you're going to be thinking about the people on that plane. And it actually happened in a part of the world where like I have my roots and you can't think straight. It affects your mood. It affects your behavior. It affects everything. And so I think we're at the beginning right now of a movement where the world is just saying enough is enough. right? News feeds don't have to be this way. Algorithms don't have to be this way. What's going to make Goodable successful is that if we can prove that we can program your mood and your behavior through algorithms, it's going to create an entirely new concept, which is forget about enrage and engage. It could be like excite and uplift. And as a business proposition, would you rather have an employee that's angry or an employee that's happy? A customer that's upset or a customer that's in a good mood and is going to pay more money as a tip to the waitress? I think that's the shift, right? Where people are starting to realize now that happiness isn't just some nebulous, like, oh, the world should be happy kind of hippie thing. No, it actually drives meaningful business outcomes. And it's obvious. Happy people don't quit as often. Happy people work harder. Happy people tell their friends to go to this restaurant or buy this product. Everything that algorithms have been doing to this point has been the opposite, just make people miserable. And so I think that's what we're trying to do. And if we're successful, we'll create a space that as of yet doesn't exist, and we'll drive massive outcomes for the partners that we work with and make the world better, and do it with a very Canadian kind of like modus operandi where we want to take Canada's desire to make the world better. We want to package that, put it into our company, and then export the hell out of that, because that's where I think the future is. I've lived in different parts of the world. I've lived in the Middle East. I've spent time in New York. I've spent time in London, Istanbul. I've lived in South Asia. I've seen countries like collapse before my eyes. And there was a pivotal moment in my life where I had just left ABC before I joined CNN. And when I was at ABC, I was wrapping up my time there. And, you know, they're based in New York. So if I'm going to fly from overseas to New York, I got to pass through Toronto because I got to see my family. And it was one of those trips where I stayed at my parents' house, and they're still living in the same house that I grew up in. And I remember I walked to the park. So I'm walking to like the park. I got my Timbs and I did the old man thing where I had like my coffee at the park bench and I was just sitting there. And on the right was the school that I went to growing up. On the left was this like park and playground and tennis court complex. Like Toronto's full of places like this. And I'm sitting there and I'm watching these kids play basketball. There's like Filipino kids, there's black kids, there's like Hispanic kids. And then I'm watching the kids let out for recess, and I hear all these different languages being spoken and everybody's getting along. And I'm drinking my coffee and I'm thinking, you know what? I don't think there's a better place in the world. I just had that moment where and all like, hey, the weather was really nice. So I think that played a role. But I'm sitting there and I was like, I've lived in all these great cities, but I've yet to experience this. And the most beautiful thing about that was that it's not unusual. You could go to almost any community, even small towns in Canada, and you'll see this. Overwhelmingly, it's a safe place. Foreign policy wise, like we don't like to ruffle a lot of feathers. Like we kind of know who we are and who we're not. Pretty good standard of living. The economy could obviously be better, but it could also be worse. You know, and so I was sitting there, and so that's a very long-winded way of saying I think Canada's a fantastic place to live, fantastic place to build a company. Where it gets tricky is I remember when we raised our first round for Goodable, I had a lot of meetings with Canadians who had gone on to become very successful in the United States. So, for example, Hollywood is filled with Canadians who either couldn't grow any further in Canada and they had to go to the US. It's like the CFL and the NFL, right? It's not a knock on the CFL, but if you offered a CFL athlete a contract to play in the NFL, every single one of them is going to say yes. And they'll probably even take a pay cut, because if you want to be the best at what you do, you've got to be in the best arena on the best stage in front of the biggest fans with the biggest market, biggest money, all those things. And that's not Canada. To be the best at what you do, you've got to have the biggest market, and you've got to be in front of the biggest investors and the biggest customers. And when I would talk to people who were in Hollywood, they all said the same thing, and it really stuck with me. They said, Canada's a fantastic place if you have a blueprint for what to build, because the talent here will build it for you. They won't complain. They won't, you don't have to pay them as much as the United States, and they're really good. But the visionary who designs that blueprint is very rare to find in Canada. And that really stuck with me because I think it's true. So I think the Canadian companies that are solving Canadian problems are doing like pretty well. I see companies raising big rounds, solving Canadian problems. And when I say Canadian problems, I don't mean like, how do I get the slush off off my boots like in the winter, right? Which is like everybody goes through that. I mean, they're solving problems that are probably global in nature, but they're focusing on Canada first. I think they'll do really well, and I think the startup ecosystem has changed a little bit, where there's now space for those ideas to thrive. I think maybe the barriers to success are still a little bit systemic. And it's all the stuff that everybody talks about, right? Like access to capital. How do you break pattern recognition? How do you inject more innovation into a system that's propped up by like a handful of pension funds, right? At the end of the day, if you actually look at like a lot of the investors that have raised rounds, a lot of that money just comes from different pension funds. And not that that's right or wrong, but I think there's ways to actually unlock even greater potential for Canadian startups. It's Canada is in general, and Canadians in general are risk averse people. That's the best thing about Canada, is probably the worst thing about Canada. It's that we don't like to ruffle the feathers, give us steady income, steady investments, a nice pension, and most people will be happy. But the real game changers are the ones that completely shatter that pattern and take the biggest risk. And I think taking a risk is something that the ecosystem needs to work on. And it's not just like, hey, go ahead and take a risk. It's like, well, how do we incentivize people to take those risks? I have friends who built massive companies that exited for hundreds of millions of dollars. They were able to take that risk because they were able to live in like, their parents' home for a little while. And so they didn't have to worry about a mortgage and things like that. But how do you incentivize everybody at every stage to say, hey, if you have this game-changing idea, we want it to be built here in Canada and we're going to support you? That's the question that needs to be asked. For so long, for as long as I can remember, I remember having conversations in elementary school about this. We identified ourselves as not being American. That's what defined us, right? There's this big giant neighbor to the south of us. We're not them. Okay, who are we? Well, we don't always know, but we know we're not them. And that was sort of the tie that binds, right? Is like, we're not American. And I don't think that's enough anymore. I think Canada's going through this process now with all this trade wars and tariffs and stuff that's probably healthy in the long run, which is we've got to figure out who we are independent of any relationships that we have with any other countries. Who are we? What do we stand for? And I don't know how long that process will take, but I'm actually somewhat optimistic. I wish this process had been done 15 years ago, 20 years ago, right? In typical fashion, like we're a little bit late to the game. But eventually we get really good at the game. And so I'm kind of positive at the discussions that are taking place. People are now openly talking about like problems, like high-speed rail, for example, doesn't exist in Canada, which is wild if you think about it, right? How long does it take to spin that up? Like a national pipeline that goes from coast to coast doesn't exist. Why is the distribution of like oil refineries so unbalanced, right? It's like, why do you have to like actually get oil from Alberta, but like the only refineries that can like process that oil are like in Newfoundland or something, right? Like, so I think these conversations are important. I think the next 10 years will be both difficult, terrifying, and exciting all at the same time, because if from a policy level we can solve some of these systemic issues, Canada is going to come out of it much, much stronger. And maybe as part of this process, we'll finally be able to say, this is who we are, right? Are we a place that innovates? Are we a place that just responds? Are we a place where you can retire with a nice job and a pension? Like, who are we? What do we want to be known for? And I think these next few years will answer that question.